The air in the room was so thick you could feel it on your skin. It was heavy with silence, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm or right before one breaks. Camera flashes went off like little bursts of lightning, but no one flinched. All eyes were on two people sitting at a long, polished table that felt a mile long. On one side sat a man whose face was known across the world. On the other, his wife, a woman whose smile used to light up magazines. But she wasn't smiling now. Her face was as hard as stone. Then she spoke. Her voice cut through the silence like a shard of glass. "It's me or the dog." Her lawyers looked down at their papers. His lawyers stared at her, their mouths slightly open. The world seemed to stop. It was a choice so strange, so unbelievable, that no one knew how to react. A billion-dollar empire, houses all over the world, a life of endless luxury, all of it came down to this one, simple, heartbreaking question. Her eyes dared him to answer, a cold fire burning in them. And as every camera zoomed in on his face, waiting for the word that would change everything, he said nothing. He just sat there, his heart breaking in a way that no amount of money could ever fix. What happens next will not only shock you, it will make you question everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and wealth. The man at the center of this storm was Ricky Davis. At 52 years old, he had the kind of life people dream about. He had built a tech empire from his garage, turning a simple idea into a company that changed how the world communicated. He came from nothing, a small town with more dirt roads than paved ones, and he had worked every single day to build his mountain of success. He had houses that looked like castles and cars that looked like spaceships. He could buy anything he wanted, go anywhere he wanted. But inside the quiet rooms of his giant mansions, Ricky was often a very lonely man. He was a good man, a simple man at heart, who just happened to be a billionaire. He didn't forget where he came from, and he was known for his kindness to the people who worked for him. He remembered birthdays, asked about their families, and treated everyone with respect. But the world of the super-rich was a strange and often cold place. It was a world of contracts, not handshakes. A world of fake smiles and quiet whispers. And in that world, Ricky had only ever found one soul who loved him for who he was, and not for what he had. And that soul was waiting for him at home, wagging his tail. Before we see how Ricky got to this impossible moment, and what his unbelievable answer was, I want to ask you for something small. If you've ever known the love of a pet, a love that asks for nothing but gives you everything, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. It feels like begging, I know, but your click helps us share more true stories like this, stories that remind us of the simple, powerful truths of the heart. It tells us that these stories matter, that you're out there listening. Your support truly means everything to us. And as you're here with us, please, do one more thing. Comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. It's amazing to see how a single story can connect people from different countries, different cities, all at once. We truly believe that by sharing this experience, by connecting in the comments, a special kind of good energy is created. We hope that this wave of connection brings unexpected joy and blessings to you and your family this week. Let's see how far Ricky's story can travel together. Your comment is more than just a word, it's a light. The woman who gave the ultimatum was named Catherine. She had entered Ricky's life like a whirlwind of glamour and excitement. She was beautiful, smart, and knew how to navigate the high society world that Ricky often found so confusing. For a while, he thought he had found a partner. He showered her with gifts, with jewels, with anything her heart desired. He thought that was what love was. But over time, he started to see that Catherine loved the life he provided more than the man he was. She loved the parties, the attention, the power that came with his name. She never understood his need for quiet, for simplicity. And she certainly never understood his love for his dog, a scruffy golden retriever mix named Lucky. Ricky had found Lucky at a shelter 10 years ago, during a time when his first company had failed and he thought he had lost everything. The dog was scared, hiding in the back of a cage, and Ricky saw himself in the animal's eyes. He adopted him that day, and Lucky had been by his side ever since. Through sleepless nights building his new company, through moments of doubt and fear, Lucky was always there, his head resting on Ricky's lap. Catherine hated the dog from the moment she saw him. "He sheds everywhere," she would complain. "He smells." She saw Lucky not as a member of the family, but as a flaw in her perfect, designer life. She couldn't understand why Ricky would let the dog sleep at the foot of their bed, or why he would cancel important plans if he thought Lucky wasn't feeling well. To her, the dog was a symbol of Ricky's simple past, a past she wanted to erase completely. The dog was a rival for his affection, and it was a battle she was determined to win. So, here they were, in a cold, quiet room with the world watching. Catherine had played her final card. She believed she knew Ricky's weakness. She thought that, faced with losing half his fortune and the beautiful wife by his side, he would finally give in. She thought he would choose the life everyone expected him to choose. She looked at him, her expression confident, almost smug. She was sure she had him backed into a corner, that he had no other option. In her mind, the choice was obvious. A man like him doesn't throw everything away for a simple animal. But she didn't know Ricky. Not really. She didn't understand the bond that had been forged in loneliness and loyalty. She didn't understand that for Ricky, Lucky wasn't just a dog. He was a promise. A reminder of a time when he had nothing, and a furry friend was the only one who believed in him. The silence in the room stretched on. You could hear the hum of the cameras, the soft cough of a lawyer. Ricky finally lifted his head, his eyes moving from his wife's cold stare to the window, as if looking for something far away. A memory, a feeling, the truth. The entire room held its breath. His answer would not just end a marriage. It would become a legend. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling just slightly under the table. He turned back to face his wife, his eyes no longer filled with pain, but with a strange, quiet calm. He opened his mouth to speak. To understand the word that was about to come out of Ricky's mouth, you have to understand what he saw when he looked at his dog. He didn't just see a pet with 4 legs and a furry tail. He saw a hero. He saw the one soul in the entire world who had saved his life. And it all started 10 years ago, in a place that smelled of sadness and fear. Ricky had just lost everything. His first big company, the one he had poured his heart into, had failed. He was broke, alone, and felt like the biggest failure in the world. He didn't know what to do next. One rainy afternoon, with nothing else to do and a heart full of emptiness, he drove to the local animal shelter. He didn't know why he went there. He just felt drawn to it. Walking past the cages, he heard so much barking. So many dogs were jumping up, wanting attention. But in the very last cage, in the darkest corner, was a small, skinny dog with golden fur. He wasn't barking. He was just curled up in a ball, shaking. He looked just as lost and broken as Ricky felt. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Ricky felt a connection he couldn't explain. But could this broken animal really fix a broken man? He pointed to the scared dog. The woman working at the shelter looked surprised. "Him?" she asked. "We call him Lucky, but he hasn't been very lucky. He's very shy. He won't come to anyone." Ricky just nodded. "I'll take him," he said. The car ride home was silent. Lucky stayed pressed against the far door, trembling. Ricky didn't try to pet him. He just started talking, telling the dog about his failed company, about his fears, about how he didn't know what to do. He talked, and for the first time in months, he felt a little less alone. For weeks, Lucky hid under the table in Ricky's tiny apartment. Ricky would just put his food and water down and sit on the floor nearby, working on ideas for a new company. He never pushed, never forced it. He just let Lucky be. Then one night, as Ricky sat with his head in his hands, crying silently over his bills, he felt a wet nose gently nudge his elbow. He looked down, and Lucky was there, looking up at him with his big brown eyes. It was the first time Lucky had come to him. That small touch felt like a lifeline. But he had no idea that this small act of kindness was just the beginning. That night was a turning point. Lucky became his shadow, his constant companion. When Ricky worked for 18 hours straight, designing his new app, Lucky slept on his feet. When Ricky was too broke to eat anything but cheap noodles, he always made sure to buy dog food for Lucky first. Having to care for this little creature gave Ricky a reason to get up in the morning. He had to take Lucky for walks, and on those walks, breathing the fresh air, his mind would become clear. The dog asked for nothing but gave him everything. loyalty, company, and a reason to keep fighting. Slowly, Ricky's new company started to grow. First, he made a little money, then a lot. Soon, he was a millionaire, and then a billionaire. He moved from the tiny apartment to a mansion with a giant yard. He bought fancy cars and wore expensive suits. His life had changed completely, but one thing stayed exactly the same: his love for Lucky. The first thing he did every morning was greet his dog, and the last thing he did every night was scratch him behind the ears. To the world, he was Ricky Davis, the tech genius. But to Lucky, he was just his person. And soon, someone would enter their lives and try to tear that bond apart. When he met Catherine, he was swept off his feet. She was charming and beautiful, and he fell in love. In the beginning, she acted like she loved Lucky too. She would pat his head for the cameras and smile. But when they were alone, Ricky started to notice small things. A look of disgust when Lucky shed on the white sofa. A sharp command to get off the bed. He told himself he was imagining it. He wanted his new life to be perfect, with the perfect wife and his loyal dog. He was so desperate for it to be perfect that he ignored a warning sign. A terrifying moment that he should have paid attention to. One summer afternoon, Ricky came home to find the front gate wide open and Lucky gone. Panic seized him. He ran through the house calling his name, but there was no answer. He found Catherine calmly reading a magazine by the pool. "Have you seen Lucky?" he asked, his voice shaking. She shrugged. "Oh, I must have forgotten to close the gate when I came in. He's probably just wandering around the neighborhood. He'll come back." Her voice was so cold, so unconcerned. Ricky's blood ran cold. He knew in that moment, she didn't just dislike the dog, she truly didn't care if he lived or died. Ricky spent the next 8 hours searching, his heart pounding with every passing car. He called shelters, vets, and neighbors. Finally, a kind family called to say they had found a golden retriever wandering near the highway. When Ricky arrived and saw Lucky, safe but scared, he fell to his knees and hugged him, tears streaming down his face. He took Lucky home and Catherine was angry. Not because the dog was missing, but because Ricky had missed a fancy dinner party to look for him. He had chosen to ignore that giant warning, but now, he couldn't ignore it any longer. All of these memories, the sad shelter, the cold apartment floor, the open gate, the terror, the relief, flashed through his mind as he sat at that polished table. Catherine was staring at him, expecting him to choose her, to choose the money, the empire, the life she represented. She saw this as a simple choice between a person and an animal. But Ricky knew it was so much more. It was a choice between a love that was conditional, a love that could be bought and sold, and a love that was pure, loyal, and had saved him from the darkness. He looked her right in the eye. The whole world was watching. And then he spoke the one word that would change his life forever. The word was on the tip of his tongue. A single word that would slice his life in two. Every camera, every eye, every person in that silent room leaned forward, desperate to hear it. But to understand the word he chose, you have to understand the world he was choosing to leave behind, or the world he was choosing to keep. It was a world shimmering with gold, but it was also a world that was incredibly cold. A world so big and beautiful on the outside, but so hollow and empty on the inside. His answer wasn't just a word, it was the sound of a soul finally breaking free. Ricky lived in a house that wasn't a house. It was a palace made of glass and white stone. It sat on a hill overlooking the ocean, and the sunsets would paint the giant windows in shades of orange and pink. The floors were made of marble so polished you could see your face in them. The rooms were so big that if you shouted on one end, the person on the other end would only hear an echo. But the echoes were often the only answer Ricky ever got. The house was filled with expensive art and priceless statues, but it never, ever felt like a home. What was the one thing that was missing? It was warmth. When Catherine moved in, she filled the house with even more things. She hired decorators who put out silk pillows that you weren't supposed to touch and glass tables that you were afraid to put anything on. She threw parties where hundreds of strangers would walk on her white carpets, holding glasses of champagne and laughing at things that weren't funny. They all knew Ricky's name, but none of them knew him. They saw the billionaire, not the man. And in this giant, perfect museum of a house, Catherine made one rule that, above all else, broke Ricky's heart every single day. The rule was simple: Lucky was not allowed on the furniture. Not the sofas, not the chairs, and certainly not the beds. He was supposed to stay on the cold, hard floor. Ricky would watch as his loyal old friend would look longingly at the soft, comfortable couch where Ricky was sitting, but he wouldn't dare jump up. He was a good boy. It made Ricky's stomach hurt to see strangers with expensive shoes put their feet up on the very same sofa that his best friend wasn't allowed to touch. He felt a deep sense of shame, but he didn't know how to fight it. But one night, that simple rule led to a moment he would never forget. It was Ricky's birthday, and Catherine had thrown the biggest party of the year. The house was buzzing with music and laughter that sounded like glass. Famous people Ricky only recognized from movies were patting him on the back. But Ricky felt completely and utterly alone. He slipped away from the crowd, the noise fading behind him, and went looking for the only soul in the house who truly knew him. He found Lucky in the laundry room, the quietest part of the house, curled up on a small rug. Ricky didn't say a word. He just sat down on the cold tile floor and put his arm around his dog. And then the door opened. Catherine stood there, a perfect smile frozen on her face. But her eyes were like chips of ice. "What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice sharp. "People are looking for you. The photographer from the magazine is here. What will people think if they see you hiding in here, on the floor with this animal?" She didn't see a man finding a moment of peace. She saw a problem. An image that needed to be managed. That night, lying in his giant, empty bed, Ricky understood that he and his wife were looking at two completely different pictures of the same life. He had tried to buy her love. He really had. He bought her a diamond necklace so big it made the news. When he gave it to her, she didn't gasp with joy. She held it up to the light, inspecting it, and then said, "Is it bigger than the one Brenda's husband bought her?" It was a transaction. A competition. A few days later, he went to a dollar store and bought Lucky a bright red rubber ball. When he showed it to the dog, Lucky's entire body wiggled with a joy so pure and so real it made Ricky's heart ache. The dog didn't care if it cost $1 or $1,000,000. It was a gift from his person. And Ricky began to wonder, who was he really living his life for? Ricky realized his money had become a cage. A beautiful, golden cage, but a cage all the same. It was supposed to give him freedom, but instead, it had trapped him. It attracted people who saw his bank account, not his heart. It built a life that looked perfect on the outside but felt like a desert on the inside. He had 1,000 acquaintances but not one true friend, aside from the one with fur and a wagging tail. He was the richest he had ever been, but he was also the poorest in all the ways that truly mattered. And he realized something devastating. He realized all the money in the world could not buy the one thing he desperately needed. A love that asked for nothing. A love that was happy to see you whether you came home in a limousine or on a bicycle. A love that would lick the tears from your face when your company failed and would wag its tail just as hard when you became a billionaire. He had that love. He got it for free 10 years ago at an animal shelter. And now his wife was asking him to sell it. To trade the only real thing in his life for a world of glittering fakes. So he sat there at that long, polished table, the memory of the cold laundry room floor still fresh in his mind. He looked at Catherine's beautiful, impatient face. He saw the life she was offering him, a life of empty parties and loveless transactions. A life of keeping up appearances. Then, in his mind, he saw Lucky, waiting for him at home, his tail probably thumping against the floor, not knowing that his entire world hung in the balance. A strange calm washed over Ricky. He knew what he had to do. But before he said the word, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out. He placed it gently on the table. It was a small, bright red, squeaky rubber ball. The red rubber ball sat on the long, polished table. It was a silly, simple thing in a room full of serious, important people. It was a splash of bright color in a world of black suits and gray faces. Catherine stared at it, her perfect lips twisted into a confused frown. What was this? A joke? Her lawyers whispered to each other, shaking their heads. The cameras zoomed in, flash after flash, capturing the image of the billion-dollar divorce that now had a cheap dog toy sitting right in the middle of it. The world was watching, holding its breath, and no one understood what the little red ball meant. This wasn't just a private fight between a husband and a wife. From the moment the divorce was announced, it had become a global obsession. News trucks had been parked outside their mansion for weeks. Reporters followed their every move. Because the story seemed so simple, the beautiful, glamorous wife and the quiet, nerdy billionaire. Everyone loves a story like that. They loved printing pictures of their lavish parties and their exotic vacations. The public had eaten it all up, choosing sides, making judgments, and feeling like they knew these two people they had never met. And now, the final act of this play was being broadcast live. Millions of people were watching. In kitchens and offices, in airports and cafes, people were staring at their phones and TVs. The world had stopped to see what Ricky Davis would do. They saw a rich man and a rich woman fighting over rich people things. They didn't see the real story. They didn't see the lonely nights, the cold floors, or the quiet loyalty of a furry friend. They saw a spectacle, a piece of entertainment. And Ricky knew it. He knew that his greatest heartbreak was being served up as the world's afternoon snack. But what they didn't know was that he was about to change the menu completely. The story the media had sold was a fairy tale. They said Catherine was a modern-day Cinderella who had won the heart of a tech prince. They never wrote about the way she spoke to the staff when she thought no one was listening. They never wrote about her coldness, her obsession with money, or the emptiness in her eyes. The news only showed the shiny, perfect outside. No one was interested in the dark, hollow inside. The public thought they knew who Catherine was. They thought they knew who Ricky was. But a story is only as true as the parts you're told, and the most important part had been kept a secret. When the news broke that the final argument was over a dog, the internet exploded. It became a joke. Memes were made. Polls were created online. Who would you choose? The wife or the dog? Most people thought it was a ridiculous, childish fight. They couldn't understand why a man with so much money would risk losing half of it for a pet. What they didn't understand was that Ricky wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about his soul. And he was trying to figure out how much of it he had already sold. Catherine could feel the cameras on her, and she felt stronger. She believed this public pressure was her greatest weapon. In front of the entire world, how could Ricky possibly choose a dog over his wife? It would make him look crazy, foolish. She was counting on his fear of what people would think. She believed he cared more about his public image than his private heart. She looked at him, a small, confident smile playing on her lips. She was so sure she had won. She had no idea that the very thing she thought was her weapon was about to become his. But in the back of the room, a young reporter named Sarah saw something else. While the older, more famous journalists were whispering about the money, Sarah was watching Ricky's face. He didn't look scared or trapped. He looked free. She saw the way his fingers gently touched the red rubber ball, not with sadness, but with love. She suddenly realized this wasn't a story about a divorce. This was a story about something much, much bigger. She held her notepad tight, a feeling in her gut that whatever happened next, it would be the most important story she ever told. Across the globe, the hashtags were trending. Hashtag Team Catherine was full of people talking about loyalty to marriage, about human relationships coming first. Hashtag Team Dog was full of pet lovers sharing pictures of their own animals, talking about unconditional love. It was a war of words between strangers who were using Ricky and Catherine's pain as their own personal battlefield. His life had been turned into a game, and everyone was playing. But Ricky was about to flip the board over. He ignored the whispers. He ignored the flashing lights. He picked up the little red ball. He looked directly at Catherine, but he wasn't just seeing her. He was seeing the last 10 years of his life. The golden cage he had built for himself. The price he had paid for success. He squeezed the ball slightly, and a tiny, funny squeak echoed in the dead-silent room. The sound was so out of place, so childish, that a few people almost laughed. It broke the tension, just for a second. It was the sound of a simpler life. Then he cleared his throat. He didn't look at his lawyers for help. He didn't look down at the table in shame. He looked straight ahead, his voice calm and clear, loud enough for every microphone to catch. But he didn't say her, and he didn't say the dog. Instead, he looked past Catherine, toward the main camera that was broadcasting to the world, and he started to tell a story. "To answer your question," he began, his voice surprisingly steady, "I have to tell you about a time 10 years ago when I was completely and utterly alone." Catherine froze. This was not how it was supposed to go. Her plan was simple, clean, and brutal. She would give him a choice so public and so clear that he would have to pick her. The world would see him choose his beautiful, sophisticated wife, and the silly dog would be sent away. It was a checkmate. But Ricky wasn't playing her game anymore. He had picked up the game board and was now showing it to the entire world. He was telling a story, his story, and in doing so, he was taking away all of her power. Her face, a perfect mask of calm just moments before, began to crack. To understand Catherine's cold heart, you have to know that she, too, had known a life with nothing. She grew up in a small, forgotten town, dreaming of a world she only saw in magazines. She saw how people looked at her, how they saw her beauty. And she learned very early that her face was a key, a tool she could use to escape. While Ricky built his escape with code and computers in a garage, Catherine built hers with perfect smiles and calculated charm in crowded rooms. She didn't want to build a new world. She wanted to conquer the one that already existed. But what happens when the king of that world loves something more than his queen? When she first met Ricky Davis, she didn't see a man. She saw a kingdom. He was quiet, a little awkward, and he seemed almost scared of his own giant life. She saw him as a project. She could smooth his rough edges, teach him which fork to use, and stand by his side as the perfect partner. In return, he would give her the one thing she had craved her entire life: safety. A life so high up that no one could ever look down on her again. She thought she could mold him, change him into the man she wanted. She never once considered that he was already whole. Her first real enemy in this kingdom was not a business rival or another woman. It was a dog. From the very beginning, she saw Lucky as a symbol of everything she was trying to erase. The dog was a link to Ricky's old, simple life, the life before her. When Ricky would sit on the floor, laughing as Lucky chased his tail, she felt a sting of jealousy so sharp it took her breath away. The dog had access to a part of Ricky's heart that was locked to her. It was a quiet, gentle part that didn't care about money or fame, and she hated that she couldn't get in. She remembered one night, a terrible storm was raging outside. The thunder was so loud it shook the glass palace they called a home. Catherine loved storms. They made her feel powerful. But Ricky was restless. He kept looking towards the door. "Lucky is terrified of thunder," he'd said. He got out of their warm, king-sized bed, took a pillow, and went downstairs. Catherine had followed him, and found him curled up on the floor of the living room, his arm around the shaking dog, whispering comforting words. He had chosen to comfort the dog over lying with his wife. To her, it was the ultimate betrayal. She had tried to compete. How she tried. She filled his life with things she thought were better. She threw parties with movie stars. She booked vacations on private islands. She redecorated their homes until they looked like museums. She was trying to show him a brighter, more exciting world. "Look at all this," her actions screamed. "Look at this perfect life I have helped you build. Isn't it better than sitting on the floor with a smelly dog?" But every time he looked at her, his eyes held a polite kindness, not the deep, unconditional love he saved for Lucky. So she decided on the ultimatum. It was a desperate, final move. In her mind, it was a test. "If you truly love me," she thought, "if you truly value this incredible life we have, you will prove it. You will get rid of the one thing that stands between us." She truly, deeply believed he would choose her. In her world, people always chose power, beauty, and wealth. You traded up. You didn't trade a billion-dollar life for old, sentimental things. It was a logical choice. A business decision. She had completely miscalculated the currency of his heart. And now, as Ricky's calm voice filled the room, telling the story of the animal shelter, Catherine felt a new feeling. It was fear. She watched the faces of the reporters. They weren't looking at her anymore. They were captivated by him. She could feel the tide of public opinion, the very thing she had tried to use as a weapon, turning against her. The world wasn't seeing a crazy man choosing a dog over a wife. They were seeing a man choosing loyalty over greed. They were seeing a man choosing a pure heart over a cold one. And for the first time, she realized who the villain of the story was. Underneath all the layers of designer clothes and diamonds, Catherine was still that little girl from a forgotten town, terrified of being left with nothing. Her whole life had been a fight to be chosen, to be seen as valuable. And in this final, public battle, she was losing. She was being replaced not by a younger, more beautiful woman, but by a scruffy, old dog. The humiliation was a fire burning in her chest. She had played her final card, and it was the wrong one. She had asked him to choose, never dreaming what his answer would truly be. Ricky continued to speak, his voice gaining strength. He wasn't just talking to the room anymore. He was talking to everyone who had ever felt lonely, everyone who had ever been saved by a pet, everyone who understood a love that didn't come with a price tag. Catherine sat in her chair, a perfect statue in a collapsing temple. The red rubber ball on the table seemed to mock her. It was so small, so cheap, so insignificant, and yet it held more power than all her jewels combined. It was the symbol of a love she had never understood, and a kingdom she had just lost forever. Ricky's voice was calm as he told the story, but that calm was new. It was a stillness he had found after a terrible storm inside his own heart. The world was seeing the man who had made a decision, but they had not seen the man who was torn apart by it. To understand his peace now, you have to understand the war he had just fought. It was a war that took place in the silent hours of the night, inside the lonely rooms of his giant glass house, just days before this meeting. And it was a war that almost had a very different ending. The moment his lawyers told him about Catherine's demand, Ricky felt like the air had been punched out of his lungs. He just stared at them. "She said what?" he asked, even though he had heard them perfectly. His team of expensive lawyers, men who handled billion-dollar deals without blinking, looked uncomfortable. They shifted in their leather chairs. They had prepared for fights over houses, over money, over art. They had never, in all their years, prepared for a fight over a dog. And they had no idea how to advise him on a matter of the heart. Their advice, when it came, was cold and logical. "Ricky," the head lawyer said gently, "it's a dog. A wonderful dog, I'm sure. But she has a claim to half of your entire company. We are talking about billions of dollars. From a financial and legal standpoint, there is no choice here. You give her what she wants in this small matter, we protect your fortune, and you can buy 1,000 dogs." They saw it as a simple math problem. They were trying to save his kingdom, but they had no idea that he was trying to save his soul. That night, sleep was impossible. The weight of the choice was a physical thing, pressing down on his chest. He walked through his silent, dark mansion. The moonlight made the polished floors look like a frozen lake. He looked at the priceless paintings on the walls, the rows of expensive cars in the garage, the infinity pool that glowed blue in the dark. He had everything a man could ever want. So why did he feel like he had nothing? Why did all these things feel like a pile of heavy, useless rocks? He felt a deep, chilling loneliness that all the money in the world couldn't warm. He found himself sitting on the floor in the living room, in the exact spot where Lucky would lie and watch TV with him. He thought back to that day at the shelter. He remembered the scared, skinny dog cowering in the corner. Ricky had thought he was saving the dog that day. But standing in his cold, empty palace, he finally understood the truth. Lucky wasn't the one who had been saved. He was. The dog had saved him from a life of crushing loneliness, long before Catherine, and long before the billions. And now he was being asked to return his savior to the cage. He tried to be logical, like his lawyers. He took out a piece of paper and drew a line down the middle. On one side, he wrote Catherine. He listed the things he would keep if he chose her. Half his company, a life without a messy public fight, the image of a stable man. It was a short list, but it was heavy with money. On the other side, he wrote Lucky. He wrote down words like loyalty, comfort, a reason to come home, a reminder of who I was, unconditional love. The list for Lucky was long, but none of it had a price tag. And that was the problem. He almost broke. There was a moment, around 3 in the morning, when the fear won. He looked at a picture of him and Catherine on their wedding day. They looked so happy. He remembered the promises he had made. The world would call him a fool, a crazy old man who threw away a fortune for an animal. He thought about the headlines, the jokes, the shame. The weight was too much. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over his lawyer's name, ready to send the text. "It's fine," he was going to write. "I'll do it." But then, something stopped him. He felt a familiar, gentle pressure on his knee. He looked down, and Lucky was there, his old, gray muzzle resting on Ricky's leg. The dog must have felt his sadness. He had woken up from his own bed and come to sit with his person. He looked up at Ricky with those big, brown, trusting eyes. There was no judgment in them. No demands. Just a simple, silent question, "Are you okay?" In that moment, the dog's simple act of kindness was more real and more powerful than all the billions in his bank account. That was it. That was the moment the storm inside him broke. The choice became so clear it was almost funny. What was the point of having a kingdom if you were all alone in your castle? What was the point of winning the whole world if you lost the only part of it that was real? He wasn't choosing a dog over a wife. He was choosing love over money. He was choosing loyalty over image. He was choosing his own heart over the opinions of strangers. He let out a long breath he didn't realize he had been holding for years. He knew then that he couldn't just say a single word in that meeting. He couldn't just say, "the dog." He had to make them understand. He had to make the whole world understand that this was not a silly choice. This was the most important decision of his life. So as he sat there, facing Catherine with the little red ball on the table, he wasn't just answering her question. He was telling his own story of salvation. He was explaining, step by step, how a scared dog in a cage had taught a lonely man the true meaning of wealth. And the most shocking part of his story was yet to come. The day of decision had arrived, not in a storm of shouting, but in a moment of quiet storytelling. The room was so still you could hear the soft whir of the cameras. Ricky held the small red ball in his hand, his voice steady, as he transported everyone from this cold, polished room to a place of sadness and hope 10 years ago. "When I walked into that shelter," he said, looking at no one in particular, "I wasn't looking for a pet. I think I was just looking for a soul that was as broken as mine." The world expected a fight about money. Instead, they were getting a lesson about love. He described the sounds and smells of the shelter, the desperate barking of the other dogs, and the profound silence from the last cage. He spoke of the skinny, trembling dog who wouldn't even lift his head. "I saw myself in that cage," Ricky's voice cracked just for a second. "Alone. Feeling like the world had forgotten I was even there. So I didn't adopt a dog that day. I think we adopted each other." Catherine shifted in her chair, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. This was not about the dog. This was about him, and she hated it. Ricky then told them about the early days, the silence in his tiny apartment, and the night he finally broke down, crying over his failures. He described the feeling of that first wet nose nudging his hand, a small, simple act of kindness that felt like the sun coming out after a long winter. "That dog," Ricky said, his voice soft but clear, with no words, "told me that I wasn't alone. He licked the tears from my face and reminded me that I still had a heart that could be loved." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But that isn't the whole story. He didn't just save my spirit. A few years later, he literally saved my life." A new wave of whispers went through the room. What did he mean? The lawyers looked at each other, completely lost. This was not in any of their files. Catherine's eyes narrowed. This was a trick. He was making something up to win sympathy. Ricky continued, his gaze now fixed on the main camera, as if he was speaking directly to every person watching. "I was working on the final code for my new app. I had been awake for 3 days. I finally passed out on the sofa in my small office, completely exhausted." He described the scene so clearly you could almost feel the late-night chill in the air. "I don't know how long I was asleep," he said, "but I woke up to barking. Not normal barking. It was loud, frantic, and right in my ear. I pushed him away, mumbled for him to be quiet, and tried to go back to sleep. But he wouldn't stop. He started pulling at my sleeve, whining and growling. I was angry, so angry. I just wanted to sleep. Ricky took a deep breath. Then, through my tired haze, I smelled it. A faulty wire in the wall had started a fire, and the whole room was starting to fill with it. The smoke alarm hadn't even gone off yet. The room was in stunned silence. The story had taken a turn no one could have predicted. Lucky dragged me by my shirt sleeve until I was on my feet, coughing, my eyes stinging. We stumbled out the front door just as the flames started to break through the wall. I stood on the lawn, in the middle of the night, holding my dog, and watched my office burn. Everything was in there. My computers, my prototypes, my notebooks. Everything I had worked on for years was turning to ash. He looked down at the red ball in his hand. He then lifted his head and looked directly, for the first time, right into Catherine's eyes. The entire world watched as his gaze locked with hers. "Everything I owned was in that fire," he said, his voice filled with a powerful, quiet emotion. "Everything, except the only thing that truly mattered. The only thing I couldn't replace." The connection was suddenly crystal clear. The fire, the ultimatum, they were the same test. A choice between the things you own and the life you love. Catherine's face was pale. The confident, smug look was gone, replaced by a cold, hard shock. She understood now. She had lost. She had asked him to throw away the very creature that had refused to let him burn. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Every person, every camera, every viewer across the globe was waiting for the final words. Ricky had told his story. He had laid his heart bare. Now, all that was left was the answer. He gently placed the red rubber ball back on the polished table, right in the space between him and his wife. It looked like a period at the end of a long, painful sentence. "You asked me to choose," he said, his voice no longer shaking, but as solid as stone. "You asked me to choose between you and the dog that saved my life. Between a life that looks good on the outside and the one soul who has been with me on the inside." He let that sink in. Then he delivered the final blow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just the simple, unbreakable truth. "A long time ago, in a fire, I was given a choice between my work and my life. My dog made that choice for me. He chose me." Ricky slowly stood up from his chair, a man who looked 10 pounds lighter. "So now, I'm making my choice. I choose the one who chose me. I choose my dog." He turned, not to his lawyers, but toward the door. As he walked away from the table, from his wife, from the billion-dollar life he had built, he said one last thing over his shoulder, a final gift to the woman who had demanded everything. "You can have all the rest." For a moment, there was no sound at all. There was only the image of Ricky's back as he walked towards the door. The air in the room was thick with shock, as if a lightning bolt had struck and no one had heard the thunder yet. Then the thunder came. It was a roar of camera shutters, a tidal wave of flashes all going off at once. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions that nobody was there to answer. "Mr. Davis, what does this mean for your company? Was this planned? What about the settlement?" But Ricky didn't stop. He didn't turn around. He just opened the door and was gone. All that was left was the chaos he left behind. And in the center of that chaos, Catherine sat perfectly still. She was like a statue carved from ice. Her face was blank, her eyes staring at the empty chair where her husband had been just moments before. Every camera, every single lens in that room, swiveled from the empty doorway and pointed directly at her. They were waiting for a reaction. They wanted tears, or anger, or a single word. They were like vultures, waiting for her perfect composure to finally crumble. But she gave them nothing. She just sat there, alone at a very long table. Back in the world, the internet had a meltdown. The live stream had gone viral in a way no one had ever seen. In seconds, #TeamDog became the #1 trend in the world. People were posting pictures of their own pets, with captions like, "I would do the same," and "This is true love." Ricky Davis, the quiet, nerdy billionaire, had become a global hero in the time it took to walk out of a room. He wasn't the crazy man who chose a dog over a wife. He was the man who had reminded the whole world what truly mattered. But what would happen to the empire he had just walked away from? Ricky got into his car and drove. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't want to hear his own name. He just wanted silence. He drove through the busy city streets, past buildings that had his company's logo on them, past people staring at their phones, probably watching the video of him. He felt strangely light, as if he had been carrying a backpack full of rocks his entire life and had just set it down. He had given away billions of dollars. He should have been terrified. He should have been in a panic. But for the first time in a very long time, Ricky Davis felt completely and utterly free. While Ricky drove towards his new, uncertain future, his lawyers were in a state of panic. "What did he just do?" one of them whispered, his face pale. "He just gave her everything. He didn't even consult us." They had seen tough negotiations, but they had never seen a client simply stand up and give away half of a multi-billion-dollar empire. They were the best lawyers in the world, and they had been made to look like fools. Catherine's lawyers were just as stunned. They had won. They had won more than they had ever dreamed of asking for. So why did their victory feel so much like a defeat? Catherine's lead lawyer leaned over and whispered to her, "Catherine, we need to make a statement." She didn't respond. It was as if she couldn't hear him. Her eyes were still locked on that empty chair. In her mind, she was replaying the last 10 years. She had played the game so perfectly. She had climbed so high. She had gotten everything she had ever wanted: the money, the houses, the fame. She had won the kingdom. So why did she feel like she was the one who was left with nothing? Why did she feel like the poorest person in the room? Meanwhile, Ricky pulled into his driveway. The house was no longer a palace of glass and stone. It was just a house. It was quiet. He opened the front door, and the sound he heard was the most beautiful sound in the world: the happy, frantic clicking of dog nails on a marble floor. A golden blur of fur came bounding towards him. Lucky jumped up, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook, and he began to lick Ricky's face with pure, unfiltered joy. He didn't know his person had just given up a fortune for him. He just knew his person was home. Ricky fell to his knees and wrapped his arms around his old friend. He buried his face in Lucky's soft, familiar fur, and for the first time that day, he let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of relief. Tears of gratitude. He had made it back. He was home. He had chosen his family, and his family was here, wagging his tail. He had lost half of his kingdom, but he had finally, truly, saved his own heart. But he had no idea what Catherine was about to do. Back in the empty conference room, almost everyone had left. The reporters had rushed off to write their headlines. The lawyers were huddled in a corner, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Only Catherine remained at the table, a lonely queen on a forgotten throne. The young reporter, Sarah, stood by the doorway, watching her. She felt a strange sense of pity for this woman who had everything and nothing all at once. The room was silent now. The only thing left on the table was the forgotten, bright red rubber ball. Then, for the first time since Ricky had walked out, Catherine moved. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Her hand, with its perfectly painted nails and a diamond ring the size of a small rock, reached across the polished table. It trembled just slightly. It moved past the billion-dollar legal documents, past the untouched glasses of water, and moved closer and closer to the cheap dog toy. Sarah held her breath, her reporter's instincts screaming. What was she going to do? In a final, shocking moment, Catherine's fingers closed around the little red ball, and she squeezed. The squeak was tiny. It was a sad, tired little sound that was swallowed up by the giant, empty room. Catherine stared at the red rubber ball in her hand as if it were a snake that had just bitten her. That one, small sound was the sound of her defeat. It was the sound of a simple, happy life she had never understood and had just destroyed. In that moment, she wasn't the powerful, glamorous wife of a billionaire. She was just a woman, sitting all alone, holding a cheap dog toy in a room full of things that had no meaning at all. The world was about to judge her, but she had already judged herself. And the world's judgment was swift and brutal. Within an hour, every major news outlet was leading with the story. The headlines were not kind. "The billion-dollar dog," one read. "Woman loses everything by demanding it all," said another. The video of Ricky's speech was everywhere. It was cut, edited, and set to emotional music. He was the hero, the man of principle, the king who gave up his crown for his best friend. And she? She was the ice queen, the villain, the woman who tried to put a price on love and lost. Her perfect public image, the one she had spent her entire life building, had shattered into a million pieces. While the world was talking, Ricky was living. He walked into his backyard, a place he hadn't spent much time in for years. It was just grass and trees. He took the old, worn-out tennis ball from a bucket on the porch, a ball Catherine had always called disgusting. He threw it. Lucky, with the energy of a puppy, bounded after it, his tail a blur of gold. The sound of his happy panting filled the air. Ricky threw the ball again and again. He wasn't thinking about the billions he had lost. He wasn't thinking about the company he had built. He was just a man, throwing a ball for his dog, and he was happier than he had been in 10 years. Then his phone rang. The screen showed the name of his head lawyer, a man who rarely raised his voice. But when Ricky answered, the man was almost shouting. "Ricky, what have you done? Your stock is going crazy. The board is calling an emergency meeting. We can fix this. We can say you were under emotional distress. We can release a statement, walk it back." The lawyer's words were a waterfall of panic. He was talking about saving the empire, but Ricky was no longer the king. He was just the man who lived there. Ricky listened patiently until the lawyer ran out of breath. He looked at Lucky, who had dropped the ball at his feet and was looking up at him, waiting. Ricky smiled. "There's nothing to fix, John," he said, his voice calm. "It's done. I'm done." He hung up the phone before the lawyer could argue. He turned off the ringer. The noise of the old world was fading, and the quiet of his new one was just beginning. He had made his choice, but he had no idea that his choice was about to create an echo that would change everything. Back at the mansion she had won, Catherine walked through the silent rooms. The staff moved around her like ghosts, their eyes fixed on the floor. They wouldn't look at her. Her phone, which usually never stopped ringing with invitations and gossip, was silent. Her friends, the ones who had laughed with her at 100 parties, had vanished. The house was no longer a palace, it was a prison. A beautiful, empty, lonely prison. And she was its only inmate. She had gotten the house, the money, the things. But the house was now just a building. It had no warmth. It had no life. It had no Lucky. Meanwhile, something incredible was happening. Ricky turned his phone back on later that night and saw thousands of emails. They weren't from investors or lawyers. They were from ordinary people. A single mother from Ohio sent a picture of her and her cat, who she said got her through a tough time. A soldier from Germany sent a photo of the stray dog his unit had adopted. Story after story from all over the world poured in. People weren't just supporting him, they were sharing a piece of their own hearts. His personal story had become their story. The young reporter, Sarah, saw this happening. She convinced her editor that the story wasn't over. The real story was just beginning. While every other reporter was trying to get a comment from the lawyers about the money, Sarah drove to Ricky's neighborhood. She didn't want to talk to the billionaire. She wanted to talk to the man who had reminded everyone what it felt like to love something unconditionally. She parked her car down the street, not sure what she would do, but she felt she had to be there. Alone in her silent mansion, Catherine did something no one would have expected. She went to Ricky's old office in the house, a room she had always hated because it was messy and smelled like a dog. She sat in his old chair. She saw a picture on his desk. It wasn't of her. It was an old, faded photo of a much younger Ricky, sitting on the floor of a tiny apartment, with a skinny, scared-looking golden retriever puppy in his lap. For the first time, she saw him. Not the billionaire. The man. She picked up her phone and made a call. Later that evening, as the sun was setting, Ricky sat on his porch, Lucky's head resting on his lap. He felt the sense of peace he couldn't remember ever feeling. His phone buzzed with a news alert. He almost ignored it, but something made him look. It was from the news agency Sarah worked for. The headline was so shocking, so completely unbelievable, that he had to read it twice to make sure he wasn't dreaming. It read, "Catherine Davis gives it all back." And more. His eyes widened as he clicked the link to read the story. Ricky stared at his phone, his heart pounding in his chest. The words on the screen didn't seem real. Catherine Davis gives it all back. And more. He clicked the link, his thumb shaking just a little. The article was written by Sarah, the young reporter from the conference room. She had gotten the exclusive story. The call Catherine had made was to her. The story explained that Catherine had not only instructed her lawyers to refuse the entire divorce settlement, she was also donating $100 million of her own money to animal shelters and rescue groups across the country. It was an act so stunning, so completely out of character, that the world was left speechless. The article included a short, written statement from Catherine herself. It was simple, and for the first time, it sounded truly like her, not a version polished by lawyers. "For years, I was busy collecting things I thought were valuable," she had written. "Today, I learned the difference between the price of something and its true worth. I have been living in a beautiful, expensive, and very poor world. My husband, by choosing his dog, reminded me what it means to be truly rich. I don't want the money he offered. I want to try and find some of that richness for myself." Ricky put down the phone. He looked out at the sunset, its colors painting the sky. Lucky sighed contentedly at his feet. He felt no victory. He felt no, "I told you so." All he felt was a deep, profound sadness for the woman who had to lose everything to finally find herself. He had walked out of that room thinking he was leaving his enemy behind. But the woman who wrote that statement was not his enemy. She was just someone who had been lost for a very, very long time. And in his own strange way, by telling his story, he had given her a map. The aftermath was a lesson in forgiveness. The world, which had been so quick to make Catherine a villain, was now confused. Her act was too big, too sincere to be a trick. The conversation changed. It was no longer about a fight between a man and a woman. It became a story about two people who had found their way out of a golden cage, taking two very different paths. Ricky's act of loyalty had been like a stone thrown into a still pond, and the ripples were now changing someone else's life. Years passed. Life found a new, quieter rhythm for Ricky. He did not go back to being the same kind of billionaire. Inspired by the thousands of emails he had received, he started a foundation in his dog's name. The Lucky Foundation became one of the biggest animal welfare charities in the world. It built state-of-the-art shelters, funded free vet care for the elderly, and created programs to bring therapy dogs to hospitals and lonely people. He used his great wealth not to build taller buildings, but to mend broken hearts, both human and animal. And Catherine? She disappeared. She truly walked away from the flashing lights and the magazine covers. The press tried to find her for a while, but she was gone. The only clue to her new life came from Sarah, the reporter, who wrote a follow-up story a few years later. She had received an anonymous tip and found Catherine not on a yacht or in Paris, but in a small town in the mountains. She was wearing simple jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair in a ponytail, volunteering at an animal shelter, calmly cleaning cages and comforting scared dogs. She looked, as Sarah wrote, happier than she ever did in a palace. Ricky never saw Catherine again. There was no need. Their story was complete. He lived his life quietly. He eventually sold his giant glass mansion and bought a comfortable house with a big yard and a worn wooden porch. His life was filled with the simple joys he had missed for so long: the smell of fresh-cut grass, the warmth of the sun, and the constant, comforting presence of his best friend. He had been offered the world and had chosen a dog. And in return, he had been given a universe of peace. One evening, as he sat on that porch, an old and gray Lucky sleeping peacefully at his feet, Ricky thought about the journey. He had learned that true wealth isn't about what you can buy, but about what you would refuse to sell. He had learned that the most loyal hearts often beat inside a furry chest. And he had learned that one small act of love, one simple choice, can echo out into the world and change it in ways you could never imagine. And that is where our story ends. It is a true story that reminds us of a simple truth. Love is not a transaction. Loyalty cannot be bought. And sometimes, the most valuable thing in our life is the one that asks for nothing but gives us everything. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think of a pet you love or a person you would do anything for, please Help us share this message. Take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It may feel like a small click to you, but each one helps us tell more stories like this. Stories that choose kindness over conflict and love over money. Please, share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of what is truly important in life. Your share is more than just a link, it's a message of hope. It tells the world that stories about simple, unconditional love are the ones we need to hear the most. Thank you for watching and for being a part of a community that believes in the power of a loyal heart.